I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. We've got a special guest this week, the widely read and highly respected New York Times columnist, Gail Collins. She'll join us in a few minutes. She writes about politics, culture for the Times, also the author of a half-dozen books, several about the history of women in America. We'll be talking about the Mueller report and Attorney General Barr's handling of its release. Later on, I'll have some additional thoughts on CODA, but we begin with the fight over immigration at full boil. President Trump angry, frustrated about the lack of progress in his efforts to build a wall on the southern border, stop illegal immigration. He seems to be ramping up his rhetoric and proposals to fire up his base for 2020. This week, he called the concept of asylum, quote, ridiculous and a big con job. Trump has threatened to close the border with Mexico entirely, even proposed dumping busloads of illegal immigrants in sanctuary cities.
We'll bring them to sanctuary city areas and let that particular area take care of it, whether it's a state or whatever it might be. California certainly is always saying, oh, we want more people, and they want more people in their sanctuary cities. Well, we'll give them more people. We can give them a lot. We can give them an unlimited supply.
Whether that's feasible or even legal is unclear, but House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ripped the mere suggestion.
It's just another notion that is unworthy of the presidency of the United States and disrespectful of the challenges that we face as a country, as a people, to address who we are, a nation of immigrants.
So where does Trump and the Democrats take the fight over immigration from here? And where does the public come down on all of this? Where's the plan? Let's ask Clyde Haberman, contributing writer for the New York Times, and Dr. Heath Brown, a CUNY professor in the Graduate Center at John Jay College, author of Immigrants and Electoral Politics. Regardless of whether you agree or disagree with Trump, whether you want a wall, close the border, or anything else, we've got something like 100,000 people coming through the border, encountered, apprehended last month alone, something like 900,000 applications for asylum pending. Those are incredible numbers. What do we do about it?
Well, I think what the president thinks we should do about that is greatly change the historic approach we've taken to immigration, which has always dealt with these kinds of issues and dealt with the reality that people want to come to the country. It's part of the commitment the United States has made to the world to take in people of all different needs. President Trump seems to view that as an anachronism and sees a way forward that's going to greatly change all sorts of national policies that have been on the books for generations. And so I think the president sees major change in the future.
He's not against immigration. He's against immigration from certain countries, including Mexico. I mean, he's even said, I want people from Norway to come. Well, people from Norway are not coming. He wants white people coming. He doesn't want people of color. When he says that it is ridiculous, the concept of asylum and a con game, he could not be more wrong. It is a concept that is enshrined both in American law and in international law, the right to seek asylum in another country when you have a credible fear of persecution in the country you're fleeing. I'm not going to pretend that every one of these hundreds of thousands has such a credible fear, but clearly a good many of them do.
And what do you do with them while they're coming in these numbers and applying for asylum? Because the numbers are overwhelming. Now they're talking about putting up tent cities in Texas.
Yeah, I think what the Trump administration would like to do is slow the process down through every means they have so that the lines get longer and the images that we increasingly see from these legal border crossings become more and more hard to watch. I think that this is part of the approach. Having been turned down by the courts, having been turned down by Congress, I think that what they're turning to is just the basic images that will come from seeing people waiting for long periods of time on long waiting lists, and with some hope that people are going to decide to turn elsewhere. It's never going to happen, but I think that that's part of the approach, is just slow the process down to the point at which the effect is people do not get to enter the country. People who are attempting to get here legally.
Clyde is right. We are talking about non-white people, but in the 20s we were talking about non-white people too. They were defined differently.
Right.
They were Southern and Eastern Europeans.
Right.
Is there a difference this time?
No, not really. I mean, bigotry is bigotry. A lot of people seem to forget that Jews and Italians, Russian Jews and Italians in particular, were once not considered white. Frankly, neither were Irish at one point. And others. We have a long, ignoble history of this. Another thing they could do is to support countries like Guatemala, Honduras, in terms of absorbing populations, and instead he's proposing cutting aid to that. It strikes me as running totally counter to his objective to try and keep people from running north. They're incoherent in the end. And the way Kirsten, I'm blanking on her last name.
Nielsen.
Thank you.
Nielsen.
Not Gillibrand, no,
Nielsen.
the immigration person, she clearly had her hands tied, and she was no thrill either. The policy is incoherent.
Do the Democrats have an alternative? We're talking about electoral politics. What are they going to present to the voters that's a better alternative?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I don't think that this has been the primary theme of the Democratic primaries, but what I do think that you would see from the Democrats running and from the those in Congress who see immigration policy in much clearer terms is to do all of the things that had really been on the agenda prior to the Trump administration, and recognizing that these kinds of solutions like a old-fashioned wall aren't going to do much of anything given the 21st century issues that we have. I think that immigration policy that's much more in line with the world that we live in rather than the world of the past is probably where the Democratic Party is likely to be smartest to turn, in recognizing that people don't simply sort of walk across the border, and if a wall is placed in their way, going to necessarily stop them. That's not the world that we live in, and a realistic immigration policy has to take account of that.
And people don't usually leave their home country with little kids if nothing is wrong there. Simple as that.
Even the Wall Street Journal the other day said in an editorial that the notion of dumping people in sanctuary cities is, at least politically, legally, not a good idea because it absolves the federal government of the responsibility for immigration, and that's where it lies. Is it legal? Does it make any sense? Is it politically smart?
Why? Look, as far as I'm concerned, as a New Yorker, I say bring them on. And
immigrants have always been good for this
absolutely.
city.
And where are we going to house them? Well, if I were mayor of New York, I would seek by eminent domain to take over some properties on Fifth Avenue in the 57th Street area.
Where nobody lives
right
anyway.
There, where nobody lives anyway, or nobody who's not on his way to jail doesn't live, including like Scaramucci and others. But I was actually thinking of Michael Michael Cohn, sorry. No, but, okay, I'm being gimmicky here. But really, take them. Immigrants have always been good for this city.
What do you think, Professor?
Not being a lawyer, the legality is sort of out of my realm, but this is not real. These are not real proposals. These are the proposals of someone who has grown so frustrated with the actual power of the presidency and is aspiring to powers that have never been a part of the White House,
right.
and is just now, after having been elected in office for 2 years, is still reconciling the rather limited powers that the president has. And rather than focus on those powers that the office does hold, he's focusing on things that are just really make-believe in the end. This is never really going to happen.
Thanks to Clyde Haberman of the New York Times, Professor Heath Brown of CUNY, and up next we'll talk politics and more with the Times' Gail Collins. Gail Collins joined the New York Times in 1995. In 2001, was named the editorial page editor, the first woman to hold that job. She stepped away in 2007 to finish her book, When Everything Changed, The Amazing Journey of American Women from 1960 to the present, and rejoined the paper as a columnist a year later. She's written 5 other books and now just finished a history of older women in America, and we're pleased to have her join us today. Gail, I assume you've totally digested the Mueller report.
Read every word.
I bet. Parsed all 400 pages. Now, what about the Attorney General preempting not only the president, but the special counsel and the press by announcing, of course, that the president has been exonerated
wonderful?
when he
Yeah.
hasn't been exonerated?
You've got this report that says, well, we can't say at all that he didn't commit obstruction of justice. And then your guy runs out and says, great news, he's fine, everything is good.
So wait, is this sort of more of the big lie, or is it a matter of interpretation, or what?
It's, it's pretty much everything that everybody always thought it knew. I don't know that I amazingly have not read it yet, but that there's all that much that will startle or amaze anyone who's followed this president. We'll see.
Well, is this, yet another case of what Pat Moynihan used to call defining deviancy down, that we're not rattled by anything this administration does anymore?
It's not. It's very hard to shock or surprise anybody. He tells untruths every single day, so people have sort of lost interest in pointing out that he made this last thing up or he didn't tell the truth today, because it happens every single day. I don't know what you do about that. It's a new. Maybe Franklin Pierce was like that or something. I don't know, but it's been not in anybody's history that we know that this has ever happened.
So you've covered a number of presidential campaigns. How do we cover someone like that differently? You can't just say time after time that he's lied about this and that, or it's an untruth, or it conflicts with reality. How do we cover him without seeming partisan?
Well, our reporters are good at that. I mean, they're very good at just going out there and writing what happened and putting it together with the other things that have happened. And I have total confidence in the objectivity of the people who are doing this work. What's going to be interesting in the campaign, you hope, is that there will be, one hopes, enough democratic dialogue that people will be able to say beyond that he lied every single day to look what's happened to your health care, look what's happened to the environment, look what's happened to this fish over here who's not around anymore, look what's happened here, look what's happened there, and to put some kind of a large context that it's hard to do on a daily basis and so that people can talk about these things in terms of their own lives.
And are people going to listen, or are they all in their little cocoons already decided who they like, who they don't like, and we've got freedom of speech, but perhaps we don't have freedom to listen?
Well, it's hard in New York. I would be challenged to find anybody who's going around saying, let's talk about the great things that have happened over the last 3 years. So we experience it in New York in our own way. The fact that people see things from one side and the other, and we imagine this is a problem in Alabama, but we experience it ourselves. It's very seldom that I run into occasions where you have arguments about politics these days because
everyone agrees.
People are so obsessed with the president, and everyone has a very strong opinion about the president, so there's almost nowhere to go. I miss the old days when we used to argue about.
Well, now we can argue about the Democratic candidates since there's so many of them. You point out that Mayor Pete of South Bend certainly leads the pack in terms of his resume. What is that going to mean? He's a great paper candidate, and we're talking about at least a year out, which is a very long time in politics. Is that paper resume going to make a difference?
Well, it does, because that's where he is and that's what he's been so far, and he appears to be like that when he's on television, when he's got a presence that sort of matches his story. And we'll see about the other ones. Beto O'Rourke came out and was not quite as overwhelming and phenomenal as people expected him to be when he was first sort of being looked at. And so many others. Who knows who's going to be incredible or horrible? It's going to be great, though. Think about it.
And it's interesting because he's turning his adversity, or trying to, into his strength, talking about the fact that he's gay, challenging the church in a way and saying, this is something that should be respected, not attacked.
That's so important. I was just thinking, we were talking about this in another context today. Americans are very open and tolerant of things that they know. And all the stories in America are almost always about people realizing that your neighbor is gay, or that, you know, that your best friend's kid is trans, or that, you know, then once you get some kind of an actual integration of neighborhoods, then that, you know, these people and these folks, they're all here, they're all my neighbors. And once that happens, people are fine. So the point is coming out. If you come out, then you've made a huge statement, much more of a statement than if you take part in a demonstration or anything else, because that's what people just need, is to see you hanging around. And to have Mayor Pete bopping around, you know, being very casual about the fact that he's gay, that he has a husband, that he's married, and he's doing this campaign, and everybody else will find it normal as the campaign goes along. And that'll be, whatever happens to him, that'll be a big thing.
You've just completed a book about older women. One of the things that people talk about in terms of Joe Biden is he too old or not, or has he just been around too long or not? That apart from his touchy-feely brand of politics. But people, as you have written, find him lovable. Is that enough to get him elected?
No, it's not. And, you know, when you think about Joe Biden as being a flawed candidate, he's been a flawed candidate a billion times already. He's been trying to become president forever, and it hasn't worked out because he's actually not a very good candidate. He's an incredibly nice guy. Everybody likes him. But as a person that you think of as being a chief executive, he just never manages to do it. It's not like this happened because a woman reported he touched her. This has been the story of Joe Biden forever.
And one of the things that is striking is that the metric by which we're measuring who's ahead, who's not ahead, not so much polls at this point, but money raising. Is that how we should be gauging presidential candidates?
Well, you'd like it not to be, wouldn't you? But it does come up. And to some extent, today, especially with some of the candidates, with Mayor Pete, with Beto, you're making money from very small donations. I think the fact that a whole bunch of people, regular, normal people, are prepared to spend $100 to a candidate that they think would be a great president is important. That's a very big deal. It's very depressing when we discover that, you know, they're going around to the corporations and who's making money in big, huge, you know, luncheons. New York is famous for that. That used to be, that's the great thing this year. Usually, the only time anybody ever comes to New York is because they want to raise money.
Right, otherwise it's taken for granted.
But in this Democratic primaries, I think maybe we might be a moment, you know? I mean, what do you think? It's possible. God knows we've got enough Democrats. We might actually have an election where you go out and you don't know what's going to happen before it's over.
I know, that would be nice for a change.
Wow, would it be great?
Yes,
God damn.
Indeed. Matt Flegenheimer in the Times had a piece not long ago about the fact that obscure candidates might as well run for president. What have they got to lose? In that category, I think we could put Mayor de Blasio. Why does someone like Mayor de Blasio run for president?
Well, a good, smart person who's running for president when they're clearly not going to win is doing it because they want to get a book deal out of it or something else that they can perceive their name being more well known. I have this terrible feeling this guy thinks that maybe he could become president. And it's very embarrassing for New Yorkers that he's bounding around the country going to these events in which 10 people show up. And you know, mayors from New York never win presidential elections. That never, ever happens. But in this
Mayors
case,
in general.
No, and in this case, it's just embarrassing to have him out there pretending that he could be president. I mean, he can't even get through the city council most days. It's very depressing.
And the governor swears that he will not run. Do we believe that?
Well, we believe that he believes he will not run today. I cannot imagine that if some lightning struck, you know, that. But, you know, if he's not running around right now, going around trying to with all these other people, the chances I don't think are very good that lightning is going to strike in this particular race. There's just too many little bolts out there.
Gail, you pointed out that Trump is using socialism as a weapon in this campaign. On the other hand, he's hardly a poster boy for capitalism.
Yes, well, everybody in New York knows that. He spent his entire life in New York running around trying to get deals from the city.
Trying to get loans.
Get loans from the city, and way back, back in the 90s, that's what he was in, Donald Trump and the city council, going run. That was when I wrote a column about that, and he said I had the face of a liar. I was a dog and a liar. That was it. That was.
Which was worse?
I kind of like being a dog.
Yeah, I like dogs.
The dogs are good. And of course, Donald Trump does not like dogs. He has never had, this is a man who has never had a pet. I think that says something about something.
Yes, indeed. Let me ask you, you had a survey of your readers about the worst cabinet member. We now have a new Interior Secretary.
Yeah, and I can see
Does
him
that
coming
skew?
up.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I think the last time I wrote one, I just looked it up the other day, and I said in that one that we didn't really have an Interior Secretary at that moment, that the last Interior Secretary was a big front runner for worst cabinet member, but I thought this guy would be an up-and-comer in the future, and already he is. We've got 15 scandals about the Department of Interior. If you get, this guy is an oil lobbyist, how could you not think that if you make an oil lobbyist the person who's in charge of protecting the public lands of America, something bad is going to happen? I mean, really.
Well, who knows the land better, up and down, right? Inside out.
Inside and out.
Exactly. Thanks to Gail Collins, columnist on the op-ed page of the New York Times, for joining us. Always a welcome guest.
Great to be here.
She'll look forward to her latest book on older women in America. It's called?
No Stopping Us Now.
Okay, no stopping her now. And I'll add my thoughts on CODA coming up next. Exactly 1 year from now, for the 23rd time since 1790, Americans will be asked to report to the government who they are. This week's population estimate should bring home why the 2020 count next April will be so vital to all New Yorkers. Next year's census results will be about more than bragging rights. Billions of dollars of federal spending will be appropriated on the basis of where people live. The census results will also determine New York State's political power in Washington and the cities in Albany. It was here in New York that the 1765 Stamp Act Congress protested taxation without representation. It was because New York lost representation in Congress that you lost the deductibility of state and local taxes on your federal returns earlier this month. According to the latest estimates, the city's growth since 2010 slowed in 2017, maybe even reversed slightly. The trend reverted to the historic pattern. More New Yorkers moved to other parts of the United States than came from elsewhere in the country. And immigration fell short of making up the difference. Trump policy and hyperbole may have driven down the influx of foreigners, but the increase in immigration might have been smaller than usual because of a statistical glitch. Instead of asking immigrants ambiguously when they arrived in the United States, the Census Bureau based its count, probably on a more accurate one, on where they said they lived a year ago. By that measure, the city's population probably decreased only because the early arrivals had been overstated. This week's results were estimates. Next year is the decennial census. It's supposed to include everyone. The Constitution says, quote, the whole number of persons in each state. Even slaves were counted, not as full people, but at least not as property. The biggest variable is whether what's going on in Washington will bully immigrants into boycotting the 2020 questionnaire. One way to intimidate them is to ask whether they're citizens. Next week, the Supreme Court will hear arguments over whether the citizenship question can be included on the census form or not. The outcome will make a big difference in places like New York, where a disproportionate share of the population is foreign-born. If you're confused about whether New York is growing or not, look around you. The city seems more congested. New Yorkers need government investment in mass transit, in housing, in health care, and more immigrants to revive our neighborhoods. We'll only get our fair share, though, if the 2020 census shows how much we count. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.